This is the Sawtooth Mountain Mama Centennial Project. We are at Cliff and Bonnie Hansen's house interviewing Mattie Hansen on the 11th of November, 1990. Mattie, we'd like to know why and how did you get to the Stanley Basin?
When I first came up here was in 1930. Started working at the Idaho Rocky Mountain Ranch in the summer. I was teaching school down in Kimberly at that time.
About how old were you when you came in?
About 23.
And you worked that one summer at the Rocky Mountain, or did you work more than one?
I worked 4 summers, really.
And when did you start teaching school in Stanley then?
Well, teaching steady. I didn't start really teaching steady until Cliff was in the 5th grade, because I did substituting for quite a long time before then.
When you first came up here to work at the Rocky Mountain, how did you get here?
Bill Hamilton came down to Twin Falls in a truck, and I rode back up in with him. I was supposed to start working earlier, but Laura and Bella were going to work at the Rocky Mountain Ranch. The California girls, I'd already been hired, but then they kind of put me off.
And who are Bella and Laura?
Williams.
Okay.
But you see, Bella was down in California with her mother and her sister the winter before, and so they were the California girls. On the 4th of July, Laura was kind of a wild little character, and Pete Snedeker was the manager of the Rocky Mountain Ranch then, and she got quite chummy with him. So on the morning of the 4th of July, she didn't think she had to get up and go to work. Winston Paul, the owner, financially owner of the Idaho Rocky Mountain Ranch, fired her. And Bella said, "If you're going to fire my sister, I'm quitting." But he fired her anyway, so they just hired the one person, me, because they didn't need that much help.
What kind of a wage did you make?
I believe it was $100 a month.
And your boarding room?
Uh-huh.
So you stayed in the lodge then?
We stayed upstairs in those rooms where they had for the girls for help.
Uh-huh. Now, was that the first year it opened?
Uh-huh.
1930? You started to teach school when Cliff was about in the 5th grade?
Uh-huh.
Can you think of any, before we get on to that, can you think of any more stories about the Rocky Mountain Ranch? Did they have a tennis court? We've heard that they had a tennis court there. Did they have a...
They didn't have a tennis court when I worked there, but they had ping pong, and...
They had the pond out front,
oh,
which you
yes.
could swim or fish in.
Yes, and we always thought, well, Pete Snedeker was quite a golf player, and he had sampled, champion things he'd won, and we thought, oh boy, are we going to learn how to get some pointers from him on golf. So, first thing we did, now this was this first summer, and the first thing we did is ask him. Yes, he said, I'll show you anything I can, but he said, you have to be able to hit that ball and knock it clear across that pond. And shoot, they landed right in the water every time, so that he didn't have any more trouble with us. We didn't want to just throw our golf balls away. On Sunday evenings, we used to all get together up in the lodge, and they'd sing songs and visit, with the guests. Most of the guests there were from the east at that time, and they'd come and stay, all summer, or like 6 weeks or something.
Oh, and they ate in the lodge?
Oh, they ate there, and then they could go out on day trips and things,
Like clear from the East Coast?
Oh, darn. Did you go in town Saturday?
And we always said the ones that live when anyone came from Idaho, and they tip us at the table, you know, for their dinners. Why, we always said you can tell they're from Idaho because they didn't tip very high.
They didn't have the money, evidently.
Evidently, they had to work for what they made.
Yeah. Did you go in Stanley on Saturday night to dances and?
Oh yes, we had more fun. We'd go in there, all of us together, and we'd say, Bardiar. You know, we're from Bardiar. Dude Ranch, Rocky Mountain, you know. And, we just had a lot of fun. Tried all the different kind of dances, old-time dances. And this one time in Stanley at the dance, it was Reva Gillespie's father was there. And when I was dancing with him, he was telling me how they did those old-time dances, you know. And he always came and asked you to go dance on some of those old-time dances with him. And it was fun. You always enjoyed visiting with him.
Was the Ace of Diamonds, did you dance at the Ace of Diamonds?
That's where we danced. And in that old Ace of Diamonds, you'd sit on the side bench to watch them dance. And the floor was so, you know, the old foundation underneath, and you just swing along. And I wondered if the thing would break when I was sitting there, and I looked out the window. They had a row of windows right there, and I looked out the window and I thought, well, I wouldn't fall too far if it would break.
Now, when did you move on to this ranch?
Well, Fred and I, we bought the ranch together, and I lived on it there from the time we were married.
When did you marry Fred?
In 1933.
1933, you married Fred Fleming. Okay. And you moved on to this ranch. Who did you buy this ranch from? Who did you buy the ranch from?
It had been homesteaded by the nieces, and then they sold it to Barney Lanier had it. We had to make our payments to Barney Lanier.
How many acres are here?
320.
320 acres you bought for taxes, back taxes. And you.
But we bought them from Barney Lanier.
And you and Fred had two daughters, Claire and Mary.
Yes, and he passed away before Claire was born.
Oh. And what did he die from?
I never did really find out for sure, because we had to take him to Salmon. Claude Gillespie took us over there, and to their house. That's when the girls were going to school there, and his girls, I mean. And Mary was just a little baby, and Claire, you see, wasn't born yet. And anyway, well, that's when it happened. And the doctor there, when we had the doctor come at Mary's house, and he said that he wasn't. It was late, you know, in the evening at night, or dark anyway, when we got in there, and the doctor said in Salmon said that he wasn't. He kind of thought maybe it might have been a bleeding ulcer, but he didn't get a chance. He said in the morning we'll get him into the hospital and find out just what caused it. But I always kind of felt he must have injured himself internally from his riding bucking horses, and I really think that must have been it.
I'll be darned. And then how long did you live here? You and the girls lived here for a while.
Yes. Then that first winter when Claire was born, we lived with my brother in Hansen. There I lived with them, and then I was back up here in the summer. I always was back up here in the summer, and then in the winter time I'd be different places. I know that about the next year I spent in Haley, rented a little house and lived in Haley.
And you taught school then in Haley too?
No, Mary and Claire were just little tots, you know. And anyway, and I needed to take care of him. And then the next year, 3 years, I went back to see my certificate. The teaching was a 5-year certificate, and I had to get it renewed, go back to school some more. So in the summertime, I'd save up my money from working here on the ranch to where I could spend enough time. And I went the first year. I could have taught the next year, except the fact that I couldn't get around and make too many inquiries about jobs, didn't have the money. And anyway, they weren't hiring married teachers then. Now, married teacher with 2 children, they wouldn't hire them. Because they, different than it is nowadays. They know they're the steadiest. But
so you went back after that and finished
then the second semester, the second winter, I went back there again. And then the next year's when I taught school in Stanley.
And what building were they using then?
It was the old building. The first year I taught, it was the old building that belongs to Harrah's now, that they've moved there on the main street.
It was the old Teachridge then later.
And Phyllis taught the year before.
So when did you move up here then and start teaching steady in Stanley? And you lived here on the ranch and taught in Stanley.
Well, then you see, after Chuck and I were married, and then after we had Cliff, I had Cliff in Twin Falls then too. And
when were you and Chuck married?
That's right, we were married in 1940.
Okay. Now how did you meet Chuck?
Up here on the ranch. He was working for the sheep outfit, and when he'd go by, we kind of got acquainted. And when they had the Gooding Smith, that's what he was working for, when they had their sheep on the ranch, see, I'd rent my pasture to them when they were here. And Jimmy, when he was always coming down, seeing, visiting with me a little bit. Come bring me some sourdough cinnamon rolls. And was that good?
You thought you better just get to know that fellow a little better, huh?
And he was so thoughtful with the girls, so good with the girls. I just felt like he's a good man for me.
And then, so go ahead.
I'm just wondering how you got around vehicle-wise from the ranch to Stanley and then through the winters. How did you?
Whenever in the wintertime, we had, after Chuck and I were married, we had, he'd made the nicest little box, kind of a box sled, and with the team horses, and we just ran all around. You put rocks down in there and get them hot, and put them in there with have a hay in there for the horses, and we'd take the sled, that box sled, and we could run all around. You'd go up and visit with your neighbors, and you'd be gone all day and come home. I know, in this one year, when we went up to Sullivan's, when Bill and Marie were up there on their place, and they had an old shed of some kind outside, and they had an old one of those old Edison Victro phonographs, with the big thick records, and that must have belonged to some of their relatives, their own relatives, And the kids had more fun playing out there and dancing right on the dirt, just playing those old time music. That'd be all of their kids and our kids. And this one time, and we played cards in the house. And that time, we didn't always play pinochle. We played canasta. In those days, they were playing canasta. And so we played canasta. And then when we got time to leave, when Marie did it, I don't know. But just as we got out, just before we left, she gave me a great big sack full of sourdough donuts. They were warm. She just had cooked them to eat on the way home. And you know, they were so good, and you could smell them. Why, we had to eat them before we even got clear out to the highway.
Now, if you wanted to go into Stanley, did you take the sleigh into Stanley?
Oh, that's the only way we could get in. See, the road wasn't open here then.
Oh, they didn't plow it or anything?
Oh, no, that was before they plowed it.
Now, when you were teaching school, how did you get in?
Oh, well, when I was teaching school, they kept the road open. I don't remember whether it was Winters. I think it was the first one to have kept the road open.
And did you have a vehicle then, or did you still have to go by
Oh, yeah,
sleigh?
we had as soon as the road was kept open, we could ride back and forth. Yeah.
Do you know?
One time when we were, we had programs, just like they do now. And I have a Christmas program. This one year, Phyllis was teaching here that year. And so we had to get down to the road. I don't remember whether we walked down. We probably walked down, or else, in our sled in the car down to the road. And then we got in the car, but our lights wouldn't work in the car. So we had the gasoline lantern hooked over the front of the radiator, and that's the way we came bouncing into the Stanley to the Christmas program. And of course it was a school program, and all three of the kids were in it. So they were kind of waiting, and Phyllis saw this one light coming up, and she said, "Well, here comes the Hansens." And sure enough, it was us. So we came in, and then they started with the program.
What grades did you teach?
Oh, I always taught the first 4 grades. And this one year, well, it was when Phyllis and then she taught so many other places in between time. And I taught with other teachers then in Stanley when I got started permanently. And then she got started, then she started in again. And this one year she wanted to go to school at Pocatello to take a few subjects that she needed in order to get her degree. So they wondered, Mr. Kempton was, Mr. Clarence Kempton was a fine superintendent. They thought that Phyllis was really the instigator of it, I think, that we could teach together until like Christmas time, and then she'd go the second semester, and then I'd have to take all 8 grades. Well, that very first year I taught there, and I had all 8 grades, and I felt like one teacher cannot do it right, no matter how hard you work. When they needed a different teacher, a lower grade teacher in in Clayton, I said, that was in 1960. I thought, or the spring was 1960. Be 59 and 60. I said, well, why don't I just teach in Clayton so I could have the grades I like,
Is that all?
And Kempton said that'd be fine. And so they hired another teacher that taught all year that took all grades the second semester, but I didn't.
How long did you teach school altogether then? How many years did you teach before you retired?
Then I taught Cliff's senior year. I taught that. That's the last year I taught.
So you taught several generations of kids then, didn't you? You taught
Yes.
fathers and sons and possibly grandsons?
That very first summer, first year I taught, I had Morgan Williams. And then the next time I would taught Morgan Jr., And that's the way it was, quite a few of them.
When did they move into the Quonset hut schoolhouse? Were you teaching when they did that, when they built this Quonset hut?
Rodney Romney was teaching then, and Mrs. Pierce, whatever her name was, something like that.
I don't know. And they used to serve hot
Mary
lunches?
and Claire were in about the 7th grade. So when they started teaching it.
And did they serve hot lunches then out of the teacherage building, or?
That was when we were in Quonset, and in the old building we had the hot.
Somebody came in and cooked lunch?
Well, Bonda Niece did for a while, and then they got started having. Then I did, run in there and fix something, and then they started in. Phyllis decided, well, she was still teaching them after I quit, and it'd be easier, cheaper, and everything for the children to just bring their lunch. And so that's the way they've done.
Right, they just bring a sack lunch.
I'd be curious about some of the interesting hardships that you endured living in a place like this that's so remote and so the elements are so
I didn't
severe.
mention any of those. We had you really had hard times.
I think people would be interested to know what was that really like for a young woman to be living in this kind of, what were the temperatures like?
Not used to it.
Yeah.
Well, now one thing, we didn't have electricity.
Right.
And I know when I was first married, and I was going to make a cake, and I just had a little in the little old shack we had to live in, a little old log house that was built with the nieces when they were first here. It's one of the first buildings. That's the one out. That's the horse barn now. Well, they just had a little camp stove in there, but did have an oven. And you could only put just 2 or 3 little sticks of wood in there to get it to have a fire, cook something. And I got my oven hot, and my recipe said 30 minutes. Bake it 30 minutes. Well, I put it in the oven, and in 30 minutes I took it out. And about the side where the fire was, it was done. The rest was not done. Oh, terrible.
Did you have indoor
plumbing? It was
plumbing?
just oh no.
Until when did you have outdoor plumbing?
We had outdoor toilets until we got the house here built. And by the way, there weren't very many houses in Stanley that had inside plumbing.
Now, this house was built in the 40s?
Yes.
Yeah. Because Cliff was born in 42, and he was what, like 5 or 6 years old when you moved in here, Mom?
He was starting in the first grade.
And where did you get your water? Did you drill?
At that time?
At that time, so you could have a bathroom.
Well, there was up behind the barn on the side of the hill there was it's kind of springy, so it was they kind of dug around there and had just a box, and then piped it down to the house here.
So, and you had a bathtub and a regular bathroom.
Old-fashioned bathtub.
When did you get electricity?
And we had a kerosene lamp in there, kerosene heaters, just a little round one to warm it up when you wanted to take a bath. And
how often did you want to take a bath?
Well, we did once a week.
Once a week.
Yeah. And you had to stay in there with it, or else the little thing would smoke till it'd be so smoky if you light it up and shut the door so it'd get warm. Why, it gets so smoky in there.
Now, when did you get electricity in this house?
Well, they were working on it when Mary and Claire were in high school, because they went with a couple of the boys whose fathers were working on it clear up here, and we got electricity then. That would have been in the 50s.
It was when power came to the valley, and I believe that was 53,
Mhm.
wasn't it?
Uh-huh.
Something I've heard that was.
Mhm.
Now the heat, your major source of heat was this fireplace when you first built this house, wasn't it?
Definitely.
And did you have a wood cook stove then
Oh, of course, we had a wood stove
in the kitchen to
in
cook
the
on?
kitchen.
And this was your primary source of heat then for your house.
Yes. And you can ask the kids about that. They slept upstairs there in the bedroom, in their bedrooms. And they'd have to get around the rocks in the fireplace up there and to get warm while they're getting dressed in the morning in the winter time. And this one time when Cliff was just a little fella, and he got the chicken pox, but and on New Year's Eve, we have parties, and this one time it was our turn to have a New Year's Eve party up here. That's when we were in the house here. And so Chuck went down with this big sled, not the little box sled, but the bigger sled, and hauled everybody up from the highway up here. See, the road was open then. Anyway, but now I know Mr. Gregory felt like those poor horses pulling all those people, so he walked, and they came up here, and Bill Wall was with them, and about everybody, and at that time there weren't so many people like there are now. And so we had we played cards and have our party, and then we were eating about that time when it was midnight. And of course, everybody could have radios with batteries, And anyway, when it was 12 o'clock, I reached over and gave Bill Wall a kiss. And if you ever saw anybody surprised in their life, he just embarrassed surprise. Everybody laughed.
Now, did everybody bring food that was kind of like a potluck, and everybody brought food?
No.
No, you furnished all the food?
Well, it was just it wasn't a dinner, it was just a
like
dessert.
snacking foods?
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
Uh-huh.
And did all the kids come too? Or?
There weren't so many children that time, but if there were, they were all upstairs asleep, And one time when Marjorie Shaw had a New Year's party, and we all went up there, but we drove up to her place, and I know we had a little Chevy, I think it was, with just the two doors, in the back part. Anyway, we had a fix for a bed back there in the back seat. And we had all the kids were there. And so then when they were getting tired and sleepy, we just, with our rocks, we got rocks for them, and the kids went out there and got their clothes off and put on their pajamas and got in bed. Slept till it was time to go home.
Mom, tell about when you would be teaching in Stanley, and Dad would bring you in milk and eggs.
Yeah, when I was teaching in Stanley, I rented that little house of Ellen Meese's this one year. And when Chuck had on weekends, that's when we were living in the little in the little shack, Why, I had this pressure cooker, my old pressure cooker, so he'd fix it up. He'd get it started with a stew. And about our favorite dinner when we got home was when he'd have the cabbage and pork, he cooked it together. Anyway, he'd come in the afternoon in this little bobsled, and when I'd be kind of watching to see if it's getting time for him to get in, pretty soon I'd see Dewey, our dog we had then, come trotting in, maybe a little bit ahead of the Chuck and the sled, you know, and the team. And so we'd know, well, here he comes, because here comes Dewey. And you know, he'd get in there and fight with every dog he could see along the way till he got in. I guess everybody's glad we came back down here in the weekend.
So he'd come in and pick you up then on Friday afternoon, and you'd come home for the weekend.
Uh-huh.
Then he'd, take you back on Sunday?
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh. And this one year, when we did this, and it was at Christmas, after Christmas vacation, you know, and it had snowed. We'd had an awful lot of snow, but we had to get back, you know, and our horses were getting tired, and about the time we got about where the forest office is now, only on the road, and they couldn't even keep track of exactly where the road was then, when it was the snow was so deep. And anyway, our horses were getting so tired, and you could just tell, breaking all that snow, and all of a sudden we heard ee-aw, donkeys, you know, mules coming along, and it was the Harry Fleming's team. He was the mail carrier then. So he passed us up, and then he broke the trail on into town, and we made it.
Interview with the Hansens at the old Hansen Ranch, and Cliff's going to tell us about this building.
This is the old ranch house. This is where we lived until I was probably, I think about 5 and a half, 6 years old when we moved in the big house. This building sat right down there.
Okay, now, if you can...
About where Mom and those people are. And it faced the opposite direction. This was the east side.
So that down where the truck was?
About right down where the truck was. Over a little further, a little closer to the creek, because this creek furnished the water for the house, winter and summer.
And this doorway you're standing in was facing...
No, it was facing east.
Oh, it was facing east. Turned completely around then.
Yeah, the building's turned completely around. Okay. And was moved out here in about 55 and changed around and used for a barn, cabin barn, because in those days the folks calved up here. In January and February was when they did most of their calving, and they calved in this barn and the big barn that was right over there. Big old barn here with a big hay mound in it that they used to fill full of hay every winter, feed the cows with. The corrals were out back. And right out back here, if you want to walk up through here, is where the spring was that fed this house when it was built. Like Mom said, it was one of the first modern houses in the valley. Had one of the first bathrooms. Where you see that little indentation on the side hill, that was the spring. It was dug out in a wooden box in there. It has since become non-active. There isn't much water there. It's one of the reasons why we drilled a well. But the water was piped from here down to the house, gravity flow. And in the house in the wintertime, the water was let run continuously, went up over a spillway up into the attic and spilled over, and then ran out the backside and ran continuously to keep it from freezing, because as everybody well knows, in those days there wasn't any digging equipment, so it was all hand dug down through here, and it wasn't deep enough to keep from freezing in a year when we didn't have any snow.
Now, it ran continuously in the winter. What'd you do with it in the summer?
In the summertime, they capped it off and plugged it, so then it filled the spring box a little fuller and had a little more pressure. It wasn't necessary, of course, to keep it running in the summertime. This building right here, as you can see, it's built in sections, was one part of the old CC camp that was over by Redfish, between Upper and Lower Redfish. This building was torn down and moved over in sections and put up for a shop. This building that you can see right over here, just see the roof up, which is a chicken house now, used to sit where this one did, and it was the shop at the time. And
who built that,
Dad
Cliff?
moved it was built probably the same time the house and the barn was built. It's as old as the house and the barn.
I have wondered that.
And it's that right here, and Dad moved it over there and put a concrete foundation under it. And it's been used for a chicken house ever since, and then, of course, it's a shop. I guess some of the things that I can remember most about building this house was Mom peeling the logs out here. I was real small at the time, and One of the other things I can remember about this house, when they put it up, of course, it was all put up with hand labor and horses. And as you can see, there's no spliced logs in it. And there were no holes cut out for the doors and windows. The only hole was the door that's on the other side of the house for them to get access to it. And it took a lot of labor and a lot of hard hours to build it. The logs came from out west of Stanley, out past the Narrows, and were all hauled in full length on an old four-wheel wagon behind an old Chevrolet car. And there was an old fellow that used to come through the country years ago and help put up hay and help some of the ranchers by the name of Jasper Dean. And he's the one that cut the logs to the house. And I can remember going out with Dad and some of the trips we had getting the logs hauled in here, just a few at a time behind the old car. And it seemed like it took forever to do it, but I was pretty small at the time, and so, you know, you could not time it. And I can remember one time when they were building it that one of my uncles were up here, and a guy by the name of Buck Allen, and they were sleeping down on the bottom, and I believe it was Phil Sullivan and I, or maybe Bob Danner, sneaked in, and we were upstairs, and they were down sleeping, and it was after a Saturday night dance, and they were a little hungover and resting good, so we started throwing chips on them. Anything we could find upstairs, we were throwing down on them, and of course that upset them, and they ran us out. But I guess really, you know, you take time to tell all the stories that's been in this old house, but it's sure been a nice place to live, and we really enjoyed it.
Has it been re-chinked or anything since then?
No.
I see the name Cliff written in the chinking next to that window. Is that your handiwork? Can you see it?
Sure do.
I'll have to say that that's a new one on me. As many times I've looked at the house, I didn't know it was
It just jumped out at me.
right up on top of that mountain. Dad cut the trees and skidded them off that hill with a horse down at the bottom, rolled them on a wagon, and took them from here up to Rember's place, which was the Pierces at the time, and they had a sawmill. And that's where the lumber was cut that's in the rafters and the sheeting that's in the roof.
Charlene, when did you work at the Idaho Rocky Mountain Ranch?
Probably 86 and 87.
So you were about the same age when you worked there as Mattie was when she worked there.
Yeah, and whenever people would ask me questions that I couldn't answer, I'd always call Grandma, and then I could answer their questions right away.
It depends on how long ago it was.
But Grandma did real well on that.
Good, thank you very much.
So you're going to ask her about what it means to grow up in a place like this. I mean, you go to school in Boise, and you're fairly unusual and unique to have this kind of
It's
background.
really an incredible place to have as home.
You know what I always thought too was children that grow up out in the country and like up here, they can go to a city and adapt themselves very well compared to the way a city girl can come to the country.